trouble getting over here today, or?
No.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you were able to make it, and everything, because it's so timely now. And like we were saying before, it's about a year now since we talked about informatics. You're looking at that Y2K problem, right, among others. Welcome very much to Conversations, where it's a pleasure to welcome to the program Ambassador Ahmad Kamal, and he is the ambassador at the United Nations from the country of Pakistan. He's been a guest on Conversations in the past, and I might say, perhaps parenthetically in this introductory note, that for those at the United Nations and in general who are interested in information revolutionary, information technological developments, he's known as a man who's more familiar with informatics and with that revolution, particularly as it relates to the United Nations, perhaps than any other single person, for which we congratulate him. But on the other hand, today we want to talk in June of 1998, particularly about the strategic implications in South Asia of the recent atomic blasts that have been taking place in India and Pakistan. And Ambassador Kamal, once again, thank you very much for coming, and welcome to Conversations. And
pleasure to be here with you, Harold.
Manhattan Network. We gave a little brief resume, and it is true that you are so informed with the information technology. We may get a chance to touch on that sort of thing. It's hard not to talk to you about information technology because you're so familiar with it. But this other event, the atomic blast by India, and then followed, briefly by Pakistan, maybe you could fill us in a little bit on your understanding not only of the events that leading up to it, and then we do want to talk some about the international, particularly Security Council and other kinds of reactions to that and their view of that situation, and particularly perhaps within a world strategic view. But maybe you could share your own understanding and your own recollections of how you became aware of it and what your understanding was that led up to the, let's say, the blast that India let loose before the one in Pakistan, but that situation.
What happened on the 11th of May this year was an event of cardinal importance because it marked an act of utter recklessness and irresponsibility by a government in India, a government which is fundamentalist and extremist, which is new. It just came to power a few months ago. It was an act which was not a surprise for us or for anybody who had been following the manifesto of this particular ruling party, because they had said clearly in black on white that they had a two-point agenda. Point one was that they were going to go nuclear, and not just nuclear, but to weaponize and to deploy. So they were going all the way in the nuclear field. And secondly, they said that they were going to sort out Pakistan, both as a neighboring country and also very much so in Kashmir. So the Indian action of the 11th of May, important as it is, did not come as a surprise to Pakistan. In fact, we had known about it for several weeks earlier and had warned everybody. The Prime Minister of Pakistan himself had addressed letters to the heads of state or government of the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, that's say the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Russia and China, and a host of other leaders, to say this is what the Indians are up to and it's coming, and do something about it.
And
nothing was done. In fact, we were surprised at the fact that we were told that there was a surprise in the United States, and that the most powerful country in the world with the most powerful and sophisticated technology that it has at its disposal in the way of satellites and spy satellites,
informatics,
yes, that they did not know.
Yes, right.
It is inconceivable that they did not know, and we thought that there was a degree of acquiescence there which almost bordered on collusion.
It's interesting because at the time when the Soviet Union imploded, as it were, in a sense, there was much derision directed at the CIA or intelligence agencies that the greatest event that could be seen coming 89 or 90 when that happened, that it wasn't known. And one wonders whether or not it was perhaps known and is said not to be known for reasons that, are intrinsic to the strategic thinking of the people who run the United States. One doesn't know. It's hard to imagine, but there was a great deal said that we didn't see that coming.
It's quite possible.
It was a synergistic surprised. And they tried to put that across, they tried to say that that was the attitude or the understanding of the American authorities and responsible people here, that it came as a surprise that India launched this on May 11. I wonder if you could help put us in the picture. They had done nuclear explosions in 1974. What is the difference? How does that fit into it? And that they were, in a sense, one of those countries that was, in a certain sense, known to have a certain degree of nuclear capability, but without one of the 5 that they're usually referred to. And I wonder if that maybe you could put that into a little historical perspective, we could, leading up to this May 5th event.
Well, India has had ambitions to greatness, more of it an illusion than an actual greatness. And since the early 60s, they embarked on an intense program of nuclear build-up. In 1974, they exploded their first device and tried to dissimulate it by saying that it was not a nuclear weapon, but a peaceful nuclear explosion. And in fact, they codenamed it as the Smiling Buddha.
Really?
But then dissimulation is built into the Indian psyche. And for those of your listeners who might not know, there is a consistent pattern in India of solemn assurances and solemn statements accompanied by an equally consistent pattern of not following up or implementing on their own assurances and statements, including written treaties. So they described their 1974 nuclear explosion as a smiling Buddha, as a peaceful nuclear explosion. Everybody knew that it was a nuclear device. What they did now in 1998 is different, because everybody knew since 1974 that they had nuclear capacity.
They had a nuclear capacity. I wonder, maybe you can help straighten this out here. Nuclear, we're not talking about a nuclear reactor or the use of nuclear power to create electricity or something of that sort. We're talking about, and it's an important area, isn't it? Because they tend to talk about the 5 nuclear powers. There are other powers. Now it's gone, I guess, to 7 we have. The way events have irrevocably changed now with these 2 blasts in South Asia recently. But there were other countries that had the capacity in a certain sense, or Israel is known to have nuclear capability, even though they're not counted. There's a shadow area there. And I wonder if you can help straighten me out or the people.
There is a difference between nuclear capabilities in the field of power, nuclear power, for example.
Yes, right.
There are about 44 countries in the world which have nuclear electrical power supplies and who therefore have reactors. But nuclear weapons is something totally different. There are only 5 nuclear weapon states recognized by the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
By that we're going to want to talk about that.
Yes. And India has broken into that club by exploding a nuclear weapon and by stating officially that it is now a nuclear weapon state.
And it did not break into that club. It was what it did with the Smiling Buddha in 1974. And what was the difference?
The only difference was in the dissimulation.
Dissimulation?
Yes, that is to say
disinformation or interpretation?
That's right.
Well, I guess that interpretation is what I was trying to get at here in terms of your mind, too, or when we say about Israel having 200, nuclear bomb capability, or they have a nuclear capability and so forth.
Israel is widely rumored to have nuclear weapons capability.
Right.
But it has not declared itself a nuclear weapon state, as India alone has done, in addition to the 5.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. Okay, right.
So the Indians decided to give up restraint, and that is why their action was so reckless and irresponsible, because in the process they did 3 things. They posed an immediate security threat to Pakistan.
Yes.
Number 2, they dealt a death blow to an international system of security which had been painstakingly constructed over the last 25 or 30 years. And thirdly, they dealt a death blow to the multilateral system of the United Nations, because at one go they challenged immediately the United Nations multilateral system in terms of nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation also.
They challenged that that had been the process by which this had been dealt with, and Okay. With their blast on the 11th and the stance that they took.
Yes, and then repeated on the 13th.
Yes, right. Okay, right.
Now, I've used the word dissimulation, which is important because it is part, if you wish, of the Indian psyche. All of us have heard about Machiavelli.
Yes.
But there are few people in the United States who've heard of an Indian author called Chanakya,
No, I have
who was in the 2,500 or more years ago, and who is the father of Machiavelli, because he's the author of the definitive treatise on the art of dissimulation, of untruthfulness, of deception, as an art of government.
No,
so
really?
The book is about deception as an art of government.
That book ought to become a bestseller in the modern era.
Well, perhaps, but this gentleman, who is not a person from whom you would buy a used car,
I see.
has his name glorified in New Delhi because the diplomatic enclave where all the embassies are located in India is called Chanakya Puri or Chanakya Enclave.
No, really.
So there
Okay,
is
interesting.
dissimulation, if you wish, is part of the acceptable form of behavior in the Indian way of thinking.
Okay,
and you have a consistent pattern. 1974, a nuclear weapon is exploded, but described as a peaceful nuclear explosion. In a few years ago, India signs the Chemical Weapons Convention as a non-producer of chemical weapons, ratifies it as a non-producer, and then 2 months later submits a declaration of its stocks of chemical weapons, thereby proving itself false.
You're in a certain sense. Pakistan and India, are obviously they're at odds. They fought 3 wars with one another. They were part of a common thing. They've had this long-standing dispute over Kashmir and so forth. You're saying this in a certain sense that you have this view toward India. Do you think this is widely understood as being something uniquely Indian, or is this something that is seen in the operation of other countries? And there are some people in their foreign policy, their foreign status, their operation, and there are some places where Machiavelli is in some realpolitik centers where Machiavelli is regarded as a hero figure and not as one of derision.
No,
And
Machiavelli
there's a difference between realpolitik and dissimulation. Right?
Yes, but we are talking of untruthfulness, dissimulation, deception.
All right.
Even in this current nuclear test, just a month before, the United States sent a very senior level envoy to India, and the Indians told him, we have nothing on the cards, we are just doing a defense re-evaluation, and that's all. While they were well in the middle of preparations for an actual test just 4 weeks later. Their first test took place on the 11th. On the 12th, they addressed a letter to President Clinton, giving the impression that that was it, and not warning President Clinton that on the 13th they were going to conduct further tests.
And all the while celebrating wildly.
Pakistan, of course, had a very major problem because the security threat had been posed to us. It was immediate, it was serious. And we started evaluating from the 13th of May what we could do about it, and came to the conclusion that the security threat required an answer to the security problem. We saw 2 things. Firstly, the Indians not only gloated over their nuclear explosions, but accompanied them with highly threatening and aggressive statements against Pakistan.
You said earlier that the recently elected or recently selected government is a Hindu fundamentalist kind of tack they take?
Yes.
This is important for people to understand in terms of the politics of
Absolutely. It is the political arm of a fascist organization which believes in apartheid, which believes in ethnic cleansing in India, and which is responsible for a number of actions, including communal riots, including destroying a 400-year-old mosque, a historic building, including doing that sort of irresponsible thing. So when we saw the aggressive actions which were coming out, you saw the Prime Minister of India, for example, coming on television, unsheathing a sword and showing it to the world that this is what we are going to do.
And when they say what we're going to do is to Pakistan, which
yes.
is their nemesis or their
Then
rival,
they came out with statements saying Pakistan has to understand the new geostrategic realities in South Asia.
I see, yeah.
Then they came out with another statement, and all these are statements by responsible ministers and prime ministers.
I understand, not
saying
just somebody
that
on the corner.
we will follow a proactive policy in Kashmir and sort Pakistan out in Kashmir.
Okay, we're going to have to talk some about Kashmir in specific terms for the general audience that's viewing.
So
but
while we had these aggressive actions,
Yeah.
we were again looking around to see what would be the reaction of the international community, and we found that that international reaction was weak, limp, flaccid. The Security Council agonized for 3 days and came forward with a weak statement which merely said that they deplored the Indian explosions. The group of 8 industrialized countries met in London, could not even agree on sanctions. The whole attitude was one of dismissiveness and of acknowledging or accepting the fact that India had crossed a line in the sand without really taking action about it. And nobody was willing to answer Pakistan's question, which was, how do we answer our security threat?
Yeah, and that ought to be understood, because India is, in a certain sense, in a regional sense, is a superpower. I mean, it's a huge army, it's a huge military capability, and they have, I suppose, from your perspective and from others who have said that they have certain kinds of hegemonic attitudes for South Asia that they've apparently, with the recent government, had made very, very manifest, and this is a direct, immediate threat to Pakistan, and that's something that perhaps we here in the United States, who are distant from that, ought to well understand, no?
Of course, India, that is the key point, India and its hegemonistic behavior. India has swallowed up enormous territories in the past 50 years, among them Junagadh, Hyderabad, Goa, Sikkim, and 2/3 of Kashmir. So it is an expansionist country. The basic difference between India and Pakistan really is one of vision. The Hindus see India and the whole region around India as a subcontinent, and they describe it as an Indian subcontinent. In fact, their special envoy, Mr. Jaswant Singh, who was in New York just 2 weeks ago, even went further to say the subcontinent of India.
Yeah, that's language from Rudyard Kipling, and so where it comes into people's consciousness.
Yes,
but it's perhaps not appropriate language for people to use.
The Indians also seem to believe that the Indian Ocean
yes.
is really an Indian Ocean.
Right,
So
okay,
now these are ideas that we've picked up in the days of Mussolini in fascist Italy, when they described the Mediterranean as Mare Nostrum or RC.
Yes, right.
And, so now this particular party, which is ruling India today, believes in a concept which is that of Greater India, meaning that the whole region, in fact, their zone of influence of this concept of Greater India goes up to Tanzania in Africa and goes into Malaysia on the other side of the Indian Ocean, with the Indian Ocean being a inner sea belonging to the Indians.
Where does that come from? I mean, where does that come from? Some sort of historical, some sort of a historical reading of something of when there was the outreach of Hindu power historically or something, or where does that from Malaysia to?
No, I think it's just an illusion or a dream for the Indians and a nightmare for the rest of us around it, which is why India has this unique distinction, unique in the world, of not being able to get along with a single one of their 6 neighbors. Not one of them is a friend of India.
You mean Pakistan or Burma or?
No, Pakistan, China, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Maldives, you name it. And their relations are poor because the Indians have tried something or the other in each of these countries.
I don't mean to put a fine point on it, but you say this outreaching or this vast view of outreach like that, is that based upon the Hindu or the Buddhist kind of as a religious or cultural underpinnings that seems to give them claim to this broader area, or what is it based on, do you think? I mean, you're aware of it.
I think it's just based on some false reading of Hindu mythology. It's
Hindu mythology.
Yeah, it's a mythological religion.
Okay.
With multiple gods and a great mythology.
But it does, for the people in the area, it does spell out that they seem to have a hegemonic kind of view, and that they have this Hindu fundamentalist government that has just recently taking power, and it sets them apart. They've had this ability since '74 in a certain sense, but they've now come forward to it in an aggressive way, particularly directed at your country.
And dangerous. And dangerous.
And destabilizing from the...
Yes, because what they have done is not just to test their atomic weapons capability. They have declared themselves as a nuclear weapon state.
They tried to say in some reports it was thermonuclear or onto hydrogen or something of that
yes.
sort. Yes, right. That's serious stuff.
But beyond that,
yes.
they have also built up a missile capability, because missiles means delivery of nuclear weapons.
Exactly.
And these are medium-range and long-range anti-ballistic missiles. And they've gone even further, which is to deploy those missiles. So they have the weapons. They have announced that they are weaponizing. They have the delivery system. They have deployed the delivery system. It just makes it a rogue state, which has to be carefully watched and controlled and constrained.
Now, Pakistan and India, since since 1947 and that sort of thing, they've been at, they've fought 3 wars and so forth, and they've had that. So you've been developing, and Pakistan, of course, just recently also exploded their own nuclear device in answer to that threat. That's a strategic threat and so forth. But they obviously, over the years, that isn't something that happens over a weekend. That's been developing over a considerable period of time in response to the development of Pakistan's atomic capability has been traditionally or developed in response to the threat that they could see growing on from India, and maybe you could just address that, because
yes.
Because in the face of this threat, Pakistan felt obliged to to show that they could not be intimidated by these hegemonic claims and so forth.
Yes, we started late, and
yeah.
we started in reaction to the Indians. In 1974, we saw it coming, and we knew that something would have to be done in order to respond to the Indian explosion of 1974. So we started building up our capacity. It took us a long time, and it is not until the early 1990s that we finally succeeded in doing what we call building up a certain nuclear capability. What unfortunately has happened in the month of May this year is that the Indian action was one of abandoning restraint. And since our security was threatened, we were forced also to abandon restraint, because nobody was willing to answer the question, how do we answer that security threat?
All right.
And we don't like it. This is not a situation of our liking, nor is it a situation of our choosing. Because for 25 or 30 years, we have been committed to the concept of nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation in South Asia.
All right. Those are 2 different concepts. Nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation are 2 different issues.
Yes, nuclear disarmament means all those who have nuclear weaponry,
including the 5.
Including the 5.
Ought to be addressing that issue,
yes.
and they don't.
Yes. And nuclear non-proliferation is pending that.
Yes,
pending
right.
nuclear disarmament, let us at least prevent a further geographical spread. And we have always been committed to nuclear non-proliferation in South Asia.
All right.
And there have been a dozen proposals that Pakistan has made, including a proposal for a nuclear weapons-free zone in South Asia, bilateral inspection of each other's facilities, bilateral signing of safeguards of the International Atomic Energy Agency. There are lots of proposals. All those proposals were rejected by India, and now we know why. Because they wanted to be nuclear. They wanted to be a nuclear weapon state. They wanted to deploy their nuclear weapons. All this partly as a threat to Pakistan and partly because of a vision of grandeur and of playing on what they think is a world stage.
Yes, I see. Do you think that view of grandeur and that was characteristics of the governments of India all along, or is there something unique and different about the government, this fundamentalist government that was recently elected, that makes it a new ballgame?
I think it is part of the Indian psyche.
All right.
But whereas the previous governments had exercised a certain degree of restraint, this particular government has thrown all caution to the winds.
If this issue is brought before the Security Council, then they would be brought within, ideally, it would want to be brought within a context that would address the security interests or the security concerns of South Asia. And is it essential, in a realistic kind of frame of reference, to address those issues in ways that would address not only the nuclear non-proliferation or nuclear disarmament issue, which is one thing, but address other vital interests that are involved in terms of the South of South Asia, and one in particular is Kashmir. The issue of Kashmir, there's been animosity over the issue of Kashmir, and that has systematically been finessed or not dealt with by Security Council or other security agencies. And does that mean that mean that to try and deal with it just as a nuclear issue is not going to be able to deal with it in the full terms of what the strategic the answer to the strategic problems confronting South Asia are really about? Or is this something that is to be somehow dealt with?
I don't think it is possible to delink the two at all.
You do not, but is there not an attempt to do that?
Oh, of course.
But this is a problem.
And it will not work.
All right.
Because if there is a peace and security problem in South Asia, and it is quite obvious that we have one, because you have one country going nuclear, announcing that it is a nuclear weapon state, and another being forced to follow suit. So you have a definite problem in South Asia, because you have two countries which have a history of animosity, and with 3 wars having been fought, and superimposed on that tension now is nuclear capability on both sides.
Right.
So you have to go into the reasons for the tension, because the key then becomes, is this a relationship which is stable, or is it a relationship between two countries which has an inherent difficulty built into it because of regional tensions?
All right.
And as you go into the tensions, you find that there is a root cause to those tensions. Part of the tensions,
in this case,
yes,
yeah, right.
Part of the tensions arise because of that difference of vision. India sees this whole area as an Indian subcontinent. Pakistan and all the other neighbors of India see it as South Asia and not as an Indian subcontinent. In other words, as a region of independent states, some bigger, some smaller, some more powerful, some less powerful, but all living together in sovereignty and mutual respect. Now, in this process, in this situation of tension and a root cause of tension, which is Kashmir, there is no way one can address the nuclear issue or the non-proliferation issue without going back into this root cause, which is Kashmir. And so the Security Council and anybody else who is interested in South Asia has to go for the jugular of the problem, because the jugular lies in Kashmir.
Now there will be people, and there will be people within the Security Council, or let's say within the 5, let's put it that way in the terms, who will want to try and take the issue of non-proliferation. They might even want to not look at the issue of nuclear disarmament, because they are in a favored position in a certain sense. I said to you, the chairman of the company of Time Warner, or the sub-chairman or co-chairman of Time Warner, Ted Turner, at one time in front of the press club, said this to the whole world down in Washington. He actually said, the nuclear powers go around the world intimidating people with their power, and he said it's just unjust. And he said he said it in a sort of half-joking way. He said everyone ought to be able to have atomic power to level the playing field. They might want to keep the 5 just as a thing and not address that issue, and de-link these issues of nuclear proliferation or nuclear disarmament from any of the other regional issues that are intrinsic to trying to understand in a strategic way the way a problem would be solved regionally or maybe on a larger scale. And is this not a problem as far as the thinking of the Security Council or the thinking of the United Nations, that trying to get at real solutions that can deal with real strategic questions? Or
yes, of course it is a problem. But let us all agree that nuclear weapons are a dangerous thing.
Yes, of course.
Weapons of mass destruction are not desirable, and therefore nuclear disarmament is something which is important. But now in the Security Council we have the problem that this is the same Security Council, incidentally, which has been dealing with the Kashmir issue for 50 years
and doing nothing
about it.
Exactly.
The Kashmir issue is on the agenda of the Security Council since 1948.
Yes.
There are a dozen resolutions of the Security Council which say the problem of Kashmir is an important problem, the territory of Kashmir is a disputed territory, and the only way to resolve this problem is for the Kashmiris to exercise their right of self-determination, and that right can only be exercised in the form of a plebiscite to be conducted under the auspices of the United Nations.
That's been written into resolutions from the 40s.
Yes,
and it's been ignored.
It's been ignored by India.
Yeah.
Pakistan accepted them from day one.
Right.
India ignored them. and the Security Council never had the guts to be able to enforce them. And so you have 2 or 3 problems which emerge in the Security Council. The first is that here is a council which is supposed to be a very important body of the United Nations.
Matters of war and peace.
Which does not implement its own resolutions. The first duty of any governing authority is to have respect for its own edicts, its decisions, its orders.
Yes.
The Security Council has resolutions, it has not been able to implement them, and it does not concentrate on the implementation of those resolutions.
Okay. Now,
the second problem,
the
second problem is that the Security Council is its fundamental job under the United Nations Charter is the maintenance of peace and security and examining responses to threats to global peace, to global whatever the threats are. It's quite obvious that we have a threat to international peace in South Asia, and therefore you have to address the peace and security aspect of the problem, and the peace and security aspect of South Asia cannot be addressed without going into the diffusing of tension and into the root causes which create those tensions in the first place, namely Kashmir. So you come back, whichever way you look at it, ultimately you come back to the problem of Kashmir. It's not a minor problem. After all, it's a large area. It is true that it is most of it is mountainous, and the key to Kashmir lies in a valley. But it has a population which is not a small population. The population of Kashmir is close to 14 million people.
That's right.
These are people who have not been able to exercise their right of self-determination. They have been physically occupied by the Indians. The Indians today, in that little territory, have got 600,000 troops.
Amazing.
So, which is approximately 1 armed Indian soldier for every 3 able-bodied Kashmiris. Now, that is the largest concentration of brute military power anywhere in the world.
And they have exercised it.
They have exercised it because more than 50,000 Kashmiris have been killed,
killed
in the past 6 or 7 years alone.
Right.
Thousands of villages have been torched. There are incidents of rape. I mean, it's the most horrible story in the history of human rights violations. And so we have a legal document, which is the Security Council resolutions, repeated several times. You have the human rights violations by Indian army and defense forces in Kashmir. You have the basic moral argument, which is that you and I and everybody else has to be committed to a concept of a right to self-determination, which is one of the highest rights given in the Charter of the United Nations. This is what is creating the problem of tension between India and Pakistan, partly, of course, that difference of vision which I told you about, where the India sees things in terms of apartheid, ethnic cleansing. You know that at Indian railway stations, even today, you have jars of water which are marked water for Muslims and water for Hindus. And there is no question of any one of them being able to take water from the water jars of the others. This caste system, which is inbuilt into an Indian psyche, of dividing everybody into castes, even among the Hindus, let alone between the Hindus and the Muslims. I'm afraid this is not quite 20th century, let alone 21st century.
Yeah, well, at the time of the breakup, the withdrawal of the British and so forth, there were some who felt we ought to just stay as one entity, the Hindus and Pakistanis and the Mongols and so forth. There's a rich history, and there was an intermingling of that, but there was felt that there was such a diversity between these two peoples that there need be, Mr. Jinnah and so forth, they formed a separate country in order to represent those interests, and those interests have to be maintained and respected in a certain sense, certainly from a Pakistani perspective, and back again to the fact that Pakistan is in a very, that India is very much a superpower in the region, that they are a superpower by population and by military capability. They are a real menacing threat to the people there, so that when they say we're going to take this militant stand, they have a power that the people must tremble in a certain sense when it is announced. And it's an existential kind of threat that the people in Pakistan feel and have had to respond to, which we should keep ourselves aware of that fact, right?
Yes. Well, India is more of a threat than a superpower, because superpower is a good word, and superpower means that you have to exercise a certain sense of responsibility and restraint.
Yeah,
and I'm afraid that is not built into the Indian way of life or way of thinking.
Okay.
The Indians are 10 times bigger than Pakistan.
All right, let's get to the dimension.
And therefore they are 10 times bigger in muscle and in power. That does not mean that their economy is that much better. India is far behind Pakistan in per capita income. Pakistan is an open market economy. It is a Western-oriented economy. India has always been a closed economy and a socialist economy. Their greatest relationship was with the Soviet Union, with whom they had a defense treaty. Pakistan has always been looking outwards towards the world. So we are an open country in terms of our economy, in terms of our thinking processes. And what surprises us is the fact that despite the great openness of Pakistan towards the West and the rest of the world, that somehow the point of view of Pakistan about the threat which is caused to Pakistan by this lumbering neighbor of ours is not correctly assessed and not correctly understood. And we are not extended the type of sympathy, understanding and help to which we feel entitled as a country that is threatened, and not just Pakistan, but a list of neighbors around India.
Not afforded that by the people, the conscience of the people here, let's say in the United States, the American superpower, or in the Western world, or in general, or by whom are you not accounted that, or accorded that understanding?
I think basically the Western
world media?
The Western world, because there is a sort of a fascination with India, which is that the Indians are very good at presenting themselves for what they are not. The whole smiling Buddha approach is an essence of the Indian marketing, advertising, management process. Pakistan, I'm afraid, is a very simple, modest, straightforward country. We play straight, we play on the table. When we agree, we tell you we agree. If we disagree, we have no difficulty in telling our best friends that we disagree with them.
All right. Also, we do want to mention the fact that Pakistan is also, in a certain sense, on a geographic scale, Pakistan is at the center of a much larger ummah, or a larger Islamic world that stretches from Indonesia to Mauritania, and there is, at a certain level, unity among the people that do ascribe to the Islamic faith, and there are some people who direct animosity at Islam. You've seen the terms. It was used in the press that Pakistan's bomb is an Islamic bomb. You must take umbrage at that, or
no.
How do you see that? Or they're saying that this now will quickly spread to other Islamic regimes or something of that sort, and that this is going to be a threat to Western interests. And there is a certain mindset in the Western mind against Islam as a religious expression, as a view of the world. You must be in a certain sense aware of that. I wonder if some of that is directed at Pakistan because of the fact that they are Islamic, and there's a distrust of Islam in the Western mind.
I don't think the educated, well-thinking, well-meaning person is fooled by this sort of thing. One has never heard, for example, of a Christian bomb.
No, you don't hear
or
it.
Or of a socialist bomb, or
of
a Buddhist bomb.
You were talking about.
So I don't think this type of label sells, except in the mind of a few who want to try and peddle the idea. There is no doubt that there is a Muslim world, just as there is no doubt that there is a Christian world. But there are as many differences between Muslim countries as there are between Christian countries. We belong to a faith and a way of life, and it does create a lot of communalities, and one can think in more or less the same fashion. But nevertheless, there are 55 Muslim countries, and there are 55 different foreign policies of these countries.
Yes, right.
So to try and put labels, I think, would be not just unfair, but it would be unwise. And I think people should examine each and every incident, each and every country, each and every people exactly for what they are worth, for their goodnesses and for their weaknesses and judge them.
Yeah, right. If that would be ideal, and that would be the world. There is this book out on the world civilizations, the big thrusts, and there's the Western civilization, and one of the major groups that they said might be a threat to, let's say, the established world organization. We do want to get back to why the Security Council takes that kind of status quo view toward the world, perhaps, too. But one is the Islamic world could be a unifying force against the forces of Western culture and economics and multinational development and so forth that is so much running the world now. You've seen this argument by some people making that position.
Yes, but the problem is that the Security Council and the United Nations and a lot of other people basically would love to have the status quo.
Yes, right.
And to wake up in the morning and to say all this was a bad dream in South Asia and none of this has actually happened. The fact of the matter is that life changes and things have happened and South Asia has crossed a line. And therefore, we can no longer be talking about the status quo. We have to get up, lumber up, tighten our belts, roll up our sleeves and do something about it. Pakistan's point of view is simple. We have a problem. South Asia is a dangerous place. It is a tension point. It is a zone of tension.
Particularly so now.
Even more so now
Even more so
than
now.
it was before, because now you have nuclear capacity superimposed. So something has to be done about
and with
it.
very strong feelings on both sides.
Yes, and therefore let's get on and address the root causes of the problem.
Let's get on to address the root causes and not try to pretend that we do not have to look at those root causes and deal with just something called nuclear proliferation apart from everything else.
Nuclear proliferation we have to look at also, but proliferation...
But in context, if we want to be real, in terms of the strategic realities of addressing...
In South Asia, nuclear proliferation has taken place.
It is taken, that's a reality.
It's a reality. It cannot be undone. Time never can be taken back. Time always moves forward.
Right, okay.
So the question is, how do we address the consequences of an Indian action and a Pakistani reaction to an Indian action?
Right, okay, right.
And that is where the Security Council and and that's why I said that the Indian action of the 11th of May did three things, and the third of them was that it challenged the United Nations and the multilateral system, because it has now asked the question, what are you going to do about it?
Yes.
And the United Nations has to answer this question, and the United Nations is you and me, basically.
Right. Yeah, and how have they, how did they answer it? How did the Security Council answer it?
The Security Council came forward with a resolution which said non-proliferation is bad and we've got to reverse it.
Yeah, and we don't have to deal with any of the things that lead to the animosity or the strategic clashes or anything of that sort. In other parts of the world, there would be other regional issues that people would be very exercised about and so forth.
Yes.
But they will deal with this non-proliferation issue, and in a certain sense, they seem, if I may, it seems to me, they're much more willing to deal with the non-proliferation issue than they are to deal effectively with the disarmament that would affect them. In a sense, it makes one feel that they are strong, able to intimidate. They did in Iraq. They intimidated the government of Iraq at the time of that with their atomic strength, didn't use it and so forth. They did knock out atomic reactor in Iraq at one point and so forth. They did that. They can intimidate the world, and we will be strong. They don't want to address the atomic, the nuclear disarmament aspect, which would affect them. They, in a sense, want to stay as a power clique that has power while the others do not. Do you see this as some sort of an issue that is going to be addressed by greater numbers of people as the world grows?
It is too late now, because you can no longer want to not address the issues.
Right.
And that is what has happened, because now you have to address the issues. You have to address the question of nuclear disarmament, because once nuclear proliferation starts, it can get extremely dangerous.
That's right.
Because if two countries can cross the line, there are a dozen other countries that can cross the line also. And how do you stop them from crossing the line?
And there's a
you can't do it. You can't just do it with a stick. You have to hold out the carrot also, and the carrot is your own credibility. And that is why nuclear disarmament has come to the center stage also, because not just nuclear non-proliferation, but nuclear disarmament. Similarly, the ability of the multilateral system to believe that the world can just go on as it did yesterday, that has been called into question. Now, tensions and root causes will have to be addressed and will have to be addressed everywhere.
Okay.
Because look at the history of what we have achieved so far. We saw Rwanda coming and we did nothing about it.
Rwanda, yeah.
Rwanda. We saw Srebrenica coming in Bosnia and we did nothing. In fact, it was sad the way we all behaved.
Right.
You have Kashmir.
Yeah.
50 years on the agenda of the United Nations and nothing down.
dead.
50,000 dead. How many more must die before people will stand up and note?
Yeah, right.
Now these are questions that the public will begin asking. Countries are already beginning to ask. Governments are asking.
Yes.
And we will have to address them.
I wonder, is there, you know, you're saying they'll have to address the issue of Kashmir in the case of South Asia. That's an issue. There will be other issues. There's Palestine in the Middle East. There's other issues in Latin America and so forth. But I wonder if it may be the Security Council and the major powers that we're going to have to address in a certain way the issue of we have a method of operation where the well-to-do, the established, are doing very, very well and so forth. There's a two-tiered kind of world that could be seen developing, that they don't have a system that's going to be issuing in or allowing for or seeing emerge a system, let's just say on a large planetary scale, that's going to be able to address the absolute essential need to have a world of elemental justice that's going to be able to be found for this earth, and they're going to have to address that very large question, and they don't have a way of addressing it? I wonder if you understand what I mean. Rather than it being a specific regional issue, the larger issue of the haves, have-nots, or whatever issue of injustice that does exist on a large scale, particularly with your informatic understanding, your understanding of the information revolution and the new technological capabilities that we do have at our disposal to answer the ancient scourges and so forth. There's a large existential problem that the human family confronts that we need an answer to, and we can't just dither and allow status quo notions to not address fundamental issues. We're going to have to be faced with fundamental existential questions of how we're going to run this interrelated spaceship Earth. And so it's a larger kind of non-regional issue. It's a larger issue that has to be addressed by the world political and economic and, I don't know, intellectual leadership.
Well,
if you can understand.
Status quo is dead.
Okay.
Because too much water has gone under the bridge during the month of May.
Yeah,
so status quo is no longer possible.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Double standards, which is the other point that you made, is definitely on the agenda of everybody now. In other words, you cannot have different types of reactions to different situations. Mm-hmm. If there is a certain sanctity to Security Council resolutions in the case of Iraq, then the same sanctity must apply to Security Council resolutions in the case of Kashmir. Mm-hmm. If there are Security Council resolutions, they have to be implemented. Mm-hmm. Thirdly, the haves and have-not problem. That is also on the table now.
And that's a world problem.
Yeah. In other words, that we talk all the time of the need for security, of global security. Whose security are we talking about? Is it the security only of the developed countries? Or is it the security of the little frogs in the little ponds also? Each one of us has an inherent human right to personal dignity and to security. And that has to be safeguarded, and that is why we have the right of self-defense, which is what the right that Pakistan has exercised in its nuclear explosions in reaction to the Indian nuclear blast, which is that we've exercised our right to self-defense.
I was going to say, yes, I understand that, absolutely. In this case, it's absolutely the case. But I was saying it wasn't a situation to be, in a certain sense, safeguarded. It is a situation on a world scale to be won. That is, an operating, a system of operating that is not going to just have the 10% or 20% at the very top of, people at the very top doing very, very well, and a mass of humanity that is not going to be. We have great problems. Lord Keynes thought of possible displacement of labor in the productive process. We have tremendous capability and tremendous challenges that are confronting us now, the whole of humanity, and it's also being felt by a great number of people, even within the developed world. There's beginning to be angst seen and so forth. That we have some real problems in terms of how we're going to operate, that our traditional economic and political, a given wisdom that we've inherited from the historical condition do not give answer to, and it's a time of visionary leadership, and we lack it on a world scale. That's the point I was, in a certain sense, getting at, and perhaps, you know,
Yes,
the vision is to be one, not to be a system to be safeguarded as it is. The status quo is not sufficient to the future.
The status quo is dead.
Okay.
This century is over.
Okay.
You're now going into a new century and, in fact, into a new millennium.
All right.
This change
Yes.
is accompanied by this extraordinary revolution in information technology and
Which
informatics.
you are Mr. Informatics, if I may say
of
so.
which the key
Yeah.
is that it levels the playing field, because it is as big a jump, it's as quantum a leap as the invention of the wheel or the invention of movable type.
Right.
The information technology levels the playing field. People now know they have access to the same types of technology, and you cannot hide behind closed doors and say, I have this technology and I will not let it go. I'm afraid it just doesn't work. Not with the internet today. There is no filtration that is possible. If you have a computer and if you have a modem and if you have electricity, you are going to have an equal access to the information database, irrespective of where you are sitting, whether you are in New York or whether you are in Tierra del Fuego.
No doubt about that. It's a very encouraging thing. Even public access television, where we're talking now, in a certain sense, is not within the gatekeeper's realm of those who might want to just keep a certain kind of status quo. But the question is, on a larger scale, in terms of the challenges, you think that the system, if you may, you think that the system by which interrelated planet spaceship Earth is going to operate so that we could get to a situation where each of the members of the human family are able to participate in some sort of a maximal kind of way, a liberated kind of way, that we have the way to that now, we understand it, either in theoretical economic terms or in terms of how we're going to operate the system, that we have a system that's in order, we have the vision, we have only to implement that vision, or is the vision yet to be won? That's what I'm getting at.
We have the vision,
You
for
think we
sure.
do? We do.
Basically,
Okay.
we are basically good, decent people. And that is because all of us around the world are rooted in some spiritual fundamental truth. We all have our beliefs, we have our religions, and they are all moral and spiritually valid. Secondly, we now have the tools, because that tool is information. Information is now accessible. And because it is accessible, the fault or the strength lies in you, yourself. It is for you to use the information that is available to you on the basis of the spiritual strengths which your beliefs give you. And the third is that the world has really shrunk, both in time and in space. Information is instantaneous. And geography has no meaning, because the internet, whether you are in the room next door or in a room at the other end of the world, you are instantaneously in the news and with the news. That is a great equalizer. And it is for the first time in history, in the history of mankind, that we have this type of an opportunity.
Yeah, it is true. It's a miracle. It really is a miracle in terms of that. And it's all extension of our capability. It's all extension of our consciousness in a certain sense. Technology is. And that we began 200,000 years ago collectively as a human society, and that we've reached some sort of a point. Do you think we've reached a point where there's been some sort of a qualitative transformation in the reality? One thing we talk about, haves and have-nots. Bucky Fuller used to talk about measuring energy efficiency and so forth, and said that we had actually were gaining by technological efficiency and good design and so forth, gaining on the numbers of people who could be seen to be haves relative to our technological capability of providing, to the point where he said we'd reached the point where there were actually more haves than have-nots in terms of our ability to provide, whereas throughout history there had not been. Do you think we're transcending an ontologic reality of scarcity in terms of the world situation in which we find ourselves, and perhaps that gives us a new capability that historically has not been available to us, as we have fought tooth and nail the ancient scourges and so forth, and fought one another throughout history, that we may be coming to the end of what Nietzsche called the history of the nightmare that a history was, that we're awakening from a history of the historical context, and that we're coming into a new kind of relationship.
I think so.
A liberated context.
I
that
think
we're
so.
privileged to be alive and participate in now.
Absolutely. This is the most exciting time
and
that ever was. And the reason for that is that you are no longer an individual. Each one of us is the world now, because you operate on a global scale. Your access is global. Your participation is global, and therefore each one of us, to begin with, there was this concept of each one of us being the citizen of the world.
Yeah.
Now you are not just the citizen of the world, you are all the citizens of the world,
Yeah.
concentrated
Yeah.
in your personal individual being. And so you are at the same time subject and object, which incidentally is a truth
Yeah.
that the Sufi philosophers found
A long time
800
ago.
years,
Right. They
800
found that
years
a long
ago.
time ago. Yeah, we have it there. But we want to bring it back. We were talking about this now. What do you see now? If we look at the situation as far as South Asia, the atomic blast, and what do you see? What do you recommend? What can you say to the people who might be viewing that we might seize this situation, particularly your colleagues at the UN and so forth? What suggestions do you have, and what lessons does this situation that we come upon now give us in terms of we try to navigate ahead?
I think basically my message would be learn from your mistakes.
Okay.
You cannot call yourself an international organization and not interest yourself in international issues. If we are here today, if the line has been crossed by India, each one of us is responsible in his own way. Where did the Indians get their reactors from in the first place? They got them from the United States and Canada. Where did they get their heavy water from? It is from the United States and Russia.
Should we ask these same questions of Pakistan?
By all means.
Yes, right.
By
okay.
all means.
Open.
So
yeah, right.
the point is, you cannot just say that we are not responsible. Each one of us is responsible for the situation. And it is therefore our duty as citizens of the world to try and resolve it to the best of our abilities.
And the United Nations is in the Security Council. Do you have suggestions in terms of how the Security Council might deal with this problem, or what lessons might be learned from this problem that apply to other regions of the world, or the operation of the Security Council or the United Nations itself?
Well, the Security Council has no option but to implement its own resolutions on Kashmir. This is not one resolution. These are a dozen resolutions spread over 20 years.
They all know what you're talking about.
The Security Council knows. It knows that its own resolutions haven't been implemented. It knows that this is because it has not tried to implement them. Well, we have a situation now which has resulted from the inability of the Security Council to take actions on its own resolutions. So it will now have to take action in order to reverse the damage that it has done to South Asia.
Right, and the fulfilling of its word on Kashmir might lead it to a fulfilling its word on other implementation of other resolutions that they've let slide over the years. So this might be a thing that would help them move in the direction that they ought to be getting on with.
And so there is a silver lining to every cloud. Even in an Indian nuclear blast, there is the beginning of a reaction which could well presage something good coming out of something which is inherently and intrinsically bad.
Well, that's what we would all hope. That silver lining is what you helped provide here, if I could, and help putting the thing in perspective, the whole thing in political perspective. And it's been your pleasure to have the perceptions of Ahmad Kamal. He's the ambassador of Pakistan at the United Nations. They're talking about recent events that are really staggering in terms of their importance to the world condition and the human condition. Happy to have been able to bring you his perceptions. We on Conversations invite you to tune in. We'll be coming back again next week. That's it for now. Ambassador Kamal, once again, thank you really very much for coming into the program and for all your work over the years and for joining us here on Manhattan Network.
Thank you, Harold.
Until next time. Well, you hit on a lot of it, so yeah. I hope you might enjoy that book. I still think we're going to need some sort of I have another thing I want to give, if you don't mind. I have another thing I'll give you about this question of the technological evolution of things on a large scale. I think we're at that kind of a time. It's an exciting time, I'll tell you.
Indeed. Very much so.
Yeah. But anyway, this should air, as I say. This program will air probably Monday next, so that would be, I'm not sure exactly the date, 22nd, I think,
something like that,
June.
yes.
Yeah. And we'll make sure you get the copy. And I'll as soon as I get that in, I will call and have it nailed down that that's going to be. I'll let you know, so we can let people know around.